The Arizona sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and deep violet. A sprawling 4-acre estate outside Flagstaff, belonging to Alton Cloud Systems, basked in the fading light. The air, crisp and cool at this altitude, carried the scent of pine and the distant echo of laughter, brittle and superficial, like the clinking of champagne flutes. This was the annual executive retreat, an ostentatious display of corporate success, where ambition wore a tailored suit and whispered sweet nothings into the ears of power. Gregory Alton, CEO and architect of this gilded cage, surveyed his domain with a predatory gleam in his eyes. His smile, practiced and polished, didn't quite reach the coldness that lingered in his gaze. He felt a familiar thrum of satisfaction, the kind that came from absolute control, from knowing every thread in the tapestry of power he'd woven. Another successful year, wouldn't you agree, Janice? He purred, directing his words to Janice Harper, his VP of marketing. She offered a practiced smile in return, a careful blend of deference and admiration. Absolutely, Gregory. A testament to your vision. He knew she meant it, the sincerity honed by years of navigating the corporate labyrinth. But tonight, the usual accolades fell hollow, the predictable performance tiresome. He craved something more. A flicker of amusement danced in his eyes as they landed on a figure moving silently through the opulent great room. Camille Bennett, one of the newly hired maids, a quiet, unassuming presence who seemed to blend into the woodwork. Her movements were precise and efficient, her gaze fixed on the task at hand, seemingly oblivious to the swirling currents of ambition and ego around her. She was a blank canvas, an intriguing contrast to the brightly colored personalities that populated his world. A perfect target. Anyone want to try their luck? Gregory's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, cut through the air. He gestured towards the antique chessboard set up near the fireplace, its ivory pieces gleaming under the chandelier's light. A few executives exchanged glances, their smiles strained. No one dared to challenge the alpha. Gregory's reputation as a ruthless chess player was as legendary as his business acumen. Come now, don't be shy. Were you all afraid of losing to your CEO? The laughter that followed was forced, tinged with a nervous energy. Gregory's gaze, however, remained fixed on Camille. He watched as she finished clearing a table, her movements unhurried, unaffected by his attention. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the polite chatter. Camille turned, her expression neutral, a flicker of surprise in her dark eyes. "Me, sir?" she asked, her voice soft, barely audible above the crackling fire. "Yes, you. Ever play chess?" His tone was condescending, laced with a subtle mockery that went unnoticed by most, but not by Alan Drake, the CFO, who watched the exchange with a thoughtful frown. Janice Harper, too, seemed to have sensed a shift in the atmosphere, her polite smile fading slightly. Camille's internal monologue, however, was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. You ever seen a man so rich he forgets what it means to be decent? That was Gregory Alton. She'd heard whispers about his arrogance, his casual cruelty, masked by a veneer of charm. She had no desire to become his next victim. But refusing outright would be a public display of defiance, a dangerous move in this viper's nest. "A little, sir," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, her expression giving nothing away. The room fell silent. The executives, accustomed to being the players, now found themselves in the uncomfortable position of spectators, their amusement tinged with a growing unease. They watched as Camille approached the chessboard, her steps measured, her demeanor calm, a stark contrast to Gregory's restless energy. "He thinks this is a game," she thought, her gaze meeting his for a fleeting moment, "but for me, it's survival." Gregory, however, misread her composure as apprehension, fueling his confidence. He saw this as an opportunity to further solidify his position, to remind everyone, including himself, who held the reins of power. He moved his pawn, a swift, aggressive opening, a declaration of war. The game began. With each move, the atmosphere in the room thickened, the initial amusement replaced by a stunned silence. Camille played with a quiet intensity, her moves calculated, precise, each one a subtle counter to Gregory's aggressive strategy. Her internal monologue was a quiet hum of analysis, a constant evaluation of the board, of Gregory's tactics, of the subtle shifts in the power dynamic playing out before them. Gregory, initially amused, found his amusement replaced by a growing frustration. He hadn't anticipated her skill, her quiet resilience. His internal monologue was a cacophony of disbelief, of injured pride, of the unsettling realization that he was losing control of the narrative. Alan Drake observed the game with a growing sense of fascination, his initial frown replaced by a subtle smile. He recognized the shift in the room, the subtle cracks appearing in the facade of Gregory's authority. Janice Harper, too, seemed to have undergone a transformation. Her gaze, initially fixed on Gregory, now flickered between him and Camille, a newfound respect dawning in her eyes. The other executives, initially spectators, were now captivated, their whispers hushed, their expressions mirroring the changing dynamics of the game. They saw not just a chess match, but a metaphor for the power dynamics within their own world, a world where the quiet, the overlooked, could possess a strength that surpassed the loudest declarations of authority. As the game reached its inevitable conclusion, a hush fell over the room. Gregory stared at the board, his face pale, his expression a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. He'd been outmaneuvered, outplayed, not by a business rival, but by a maid. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft chime of a distant clock. Camille, her expression unchanged, met his gaze, her eyes holding a quiet strength, a silent acknowledgement of the victory that was more than just a game. The aftermath of the game hung heavy in the air. The subtle shift in the power dynamic, witnessed by all, had left an indelible mark. Alan Drake approached Camille, a genuine smile gracing his lips. "Impressive game, Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone respectful, devoid of the usual condescension. Camille offered a small nod, her internal monologue a quiet echo of the satisfaction she felt, not just from winning, but from subtly challenging the established order. Janice Harper, too, approached Camille, her expression thoughtful. I hadn't realized," she stammered, her voice laced with a newfound respect. "You have quite a talent." Camille's quiet strength had not only challenged Gregory's authority, but had also forced the other executives to reevaluate their own perceptions, to see beyond the surface, to acknowledge the hidden depths that existed beneath the veneer of titles and positions. Gregory, left alone with his defeat, stared into the dying embers of the fire. The image of the chessboard burned into his mind. The quiet humiliation he felt was a stark contrast to the arrogant confidence he displayed earlier. The game had been a mirror, reflecting not just his skill, or lack thereof, but also his shallowness, his blindness to the quiet strength that existed in the periphery of his carefully constructed world. The night, which had begun with a display of power, ended with a quiet revelation, a subtle shift in the tectonic plates of the corporate landscape. The chess game had been more than just a game. It was a catalyst, a harbinger of change, a testament to the quiet power that resides in the unexpected. The muted clink of crystal against porcelain echoed through the cavernous hall, a fragile counterpoint to the low hum of conversation. Camille Bennett, her hands encased in white cotton gloves, moved silently amongst the executives and their spouses, refilling champagne flutes and collecting discarded canapes. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the subtle tang of anxiety, the kind that clung to people who measured success in fractions of percentages. She registered their glances, some dismissive, some curious, but none truly seeing her. She was part of the backdrop, the unobtrusive facilitator of their luxurious weekend retreat. Tonight, the grand hall of Gregory Alton's sprawling estate served as their playground. A marble chessboard, its squares gleaming under the chandelier's light, sat near the fireplace, a silent dare in the opulent space. Camille had seen it earlier, a pristine battlefield awaiting its warriors. She hadn't expected to be one of them. "Camille, my dear." Gregory Alton's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, sliced through the air. He stood before her, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Fancy a game of chess?" Camille's breath hitched, a tiny ripple in the placid surface of her demeanor. She knew this wasn't a genuine invitation. It was a performance, a display for his audience. He wanted to toy with her, to demonstrate his superiority in yet another arena. Her internal monologue raged, a whirlwind of resentment and a flicker of something akin to defiance. Does he think I'm stupid? Does he think I don't see the amusement dancing in his eyes? Her hand tightened around the silver tray. "Sure, if you want to play, I'll play," she replied, her voice even, betraying none of the turmoil within. A murmur rippled through the gathered executives. Janice Harper, VP of Marketing, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Alan Drake, the CFO, watched with an unervingly perceptive gaze. The others, a mix of senior management and their spouses, shifted closer, their initial indifference replaced by a morbid curiosity. Gregory chuckled, a sound that grated on Camille's nerves. "Don't be shy. Let's see what the help can do." His words hung in the air, heavy with condescension. Camille met his gaze, her own eyes unreadable. "You want a show? I'll give him one." She set the tray down on a nearby table with meticulous care, each movement precise and deliberate, as if placing her own anxieties alongside the discarded silverware. The first few moves were a dance of predictable formality. Gregory, playing white, advanced his pawn with a flourish, his eyes scanning the room, basking in the attention. Camille responded in kind, her movements economical, her expression unreadable. "He's playing for the audience. I'm playing the board." Her mind, a steel trap, clicked through variations, analyzing his every move, searching for weaknesses. With each piece she touched, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The initial amusement faded, replaced by a growing unease. Janice Harper's polite smile tightened, a flicker of something like respect crossing her face. Alan Drake leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the board, a knowing glint in his eyes. Gregory's initial confidence began to crack. Camille's quiet strength unnerved him. He had expected a clumsy, easily defeated opponent. Instead, he found himself facing a strategist, each move carefully considered, each piece placed with intent. He pushed his queen forward, a bold, almost reckless maneuver. "This will end it quickly," he thought, a flicker of irritation rising within him. Camille paused, her fingers hovering over her knight. The room held its breath. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner suddenly became deafening. Then, with a delicate movement, she moved her knight, sacrificing it to trap his queen. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Gregory's face paled, his smug facade crumbling. He stared at the board, his mind racing, searching for a way out. There was none. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as insignificant. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at Camille, truly saw her for the first time, not as a servant, but as an opponent, a force to be reckoned with. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling fire in the hearth. She planned this. From the very beginning, he realized, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "Checkmate," Camille said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The word resonated through the room, not just as the end of a game, but as a symbol of a power shift, a subtle rebellion. Gregory's defeat was more than just a loss on a chessboard. It was a crack in the carefully constructed facade of his authority. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air. If he could misjudge her so completely, what else has he misjudged? Alan Drake cleared his throat, a barely perceptible smile playing on his lips. "A brilliant game, Camille," he said, his voice laced with a newfound respect. Janice Harper nodded in agreement, her eyes narrowed in thought. The other executives murmured their assent, their words hollow, their smiles strained. The atmosphere had shifted, the air thick with unspoken tension. Gregory sat frozen, his hand hovering over the captured queen, a symbol of his own shattered ego. He had intended to humiliate Camille, to reaffirm his position at the top of the hierarchy. Instead, he had exposed his own vulnerability, his own blindness. The game had become a mirror, reflecting not just Camille's quiet strength, but his own glaring weaknesses. The clink of crystal against porcelain, once a symbol of effortless luxury, now seemed to echo the fragility of his own carefully constructed world. The quiet click of ivory against ivory resonated in the opulent game room, a stark counterpoint to the hushed whispers that had begun to circulate. Gregory Alton, CEO of Alton Cloud Systems, leaned forward, his expensive suit straining slightly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He moved his knight, a swift, aggressive maneuver meant to destabilize Camille Bennett's defenses. He'd expected a flicker of fear, a hint of uncertainty. Instead, Camille remained impassive, her gaze steady, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Easy prey, he thought, a smirk playing on his lips. Let's see how long she lasts. Camille, however, felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The initial amusement, the condescending smiles, were slowly being replaced by something akin to respect. She absorbed Gregory's move, dissecting it with the precision of a surgeon. He plays like he conducts business, she mused, bold, impulsive, focused on immediate gains, blind to long-term strategy. She moved her bishop, a seemingly defensive play that, in reality, laid the groundwork for a devastating counterattack. This is called the Italian game classic, she murmured, her voice soft yet clear. The unexpected comment hung in the air, a quiet challenge to the prevailing assumption of her incompetence. Janice Harper, VP of Marketing, watched the game with a newfound fascination. Initially, she'd seen it as another instance of Gregory's casual cruelty, a display of power meant to remind everyone of their place. But Camille's quiet confidence, the way she seemed to anticipate Gregory's every move, was unsettling. There's more to her than meets the eye, Janice realized, a flicker of unease mixing with her curiosity. Alan Drake, the CFO, leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the board. He'd always been acutely aware of the undercurrents of power flowing through the company, the subtle shifts in alliances and influence. He recognized the game for what it was, not just a pastime, but a battleground where hierarchies were being challenged. She's not guessing, he observed quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Look at her. She's studying him. He saw the subtle tightening of Gregory's jaw, the first sign of the CEO's growing discomfort. Gregory felt a prickle of irritation. This was not how it was supposed to go. He'd envisioned a swift victory, a demonstration of his intellectual superiority. Instead, he found himself struggling, his aggressive tactics countered by Camille's patient, calculated moves. He tried to dismiss her skill as luck, a fluke, but the unwavering calm in her eyes told a different story. Who is this woman? He wondered, a flicker of genuine curiosity breaking through the wall of his arrogance. Camille felt the weight of the room's attention, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. She knew her performance was dismantling their preconceived notions, challenging the carefully constructed power dynamics of this exclusive retreat. But she didn't let it faze her. Each move was deliberate, calculated, a reflection of the rigorous logic she'd honed during her years studying computer science. She remembered late nights in the library at Fisk, the thrill of solving complex algorithms, the quiet satisfaction of mastering intricate systems. I played a little in college Fisk, she offered in response to Alan's observation, her voice even, devoid of any boastfulness. The simple statement, delivered with such understated confidence, sent ripples through the room. Fisk, a historically black university known for its academic rigor? Janice thought, her perception of Camille shifting yet again. The other executives and staff members, initially amused by the spectacle, were now silent, their faces a mixture of surprise and dawning comprehension. They had underestimated Camille, dismissed her as just another member of the serving staff. Now, they were witnessing a quiet dismantling of their assumptions, a subtle but powerful challenge to the established order. Gregory's irritation morphed into unease. He felt the shift in the room, the subtle erosion of his authority. He'd intended to humiliate Camille, to reinforce his position at the top of the hierarchy. Instead, he was being exposed, his flaws laid bare for all to see. He made another rash move, a desperate attempt to regain control of the game, of the situation. Camille countered with effortless grace, her queen gliding across the board to deliver a devastating check. The room held its breath. The click of the piece landing on the square seemed to echo the silent shift in power. The game was no longer a game. It was a statement. Gregory stared at the board, his face flushed, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. He could feel the weight of the others' gazes, the silent judgment in their eyes. He'd miscalculated, underestimated his opponent. And in doing so, he'd revealed more about himself than he intended. He saw the quiet respect in Janice's eyes, the knowing look on Alan's face, the dawning realization in the faces of the other executives. He had meant to showcase his power, but instead, he had inadvertently exposed his weakness, his insecurity masked by a veneer of arrogance. Camille met his gaze, her expression unchanged, her eyes reflecting the calm strength that resided within. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths. The chessboard became a mirror, reflecting not just the game, but the intricate power dynamics of the room, the unspoken tensions, the hidden truths that were now, slowly, beginning to surface. The gentle clinking of ice in crystal glasses, the hushed murmurs of conversation, the distant strains of a piano melody, the atmosphere in the executive retreat's grand hall remained deceptively serene, a thin veneer over the tension that crackled like static electricity. Gregory Alton, CEO of Alton Cloud Systems, leaned back in his plush armchair, a smirk playing on his lips. Across the antique chessboard, Camille Bennett, a maid temporarily hired for the retreat, sat with an unervingly calm composure. Her fingers hovered over a knight, the smooth, cool ivory a stark contrast to the simmering turmoil Gregory assumed must be brewing beneath her placid surface. He couldn't fathom how this quiet, unassuming woman, someone he barely registered as a presence in his meticulously curated world, could possibly pose a challenge. This game, he thought, was merely a playful demonstration of his superiority, a light-hearted jab at those beneath his social stratum. Camille moved the knight. A simple, almost predictable move. Gregory's smirk widened. Amateur. He countered with his queen, a bold, aggressive maneuver meant to intimidate, to establish dominance early on. He glanced up, seeking a flicker of fear, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. He found none. Camille's gaze remained steady, focused on the board, as if the queen's advance was a mere trifle, a minor inconvenience. A prickle of unease, small and sharp, ran down Gregory's spine. Interesting opening. Janice Harper, VP of Marketing, commented from her position on the plush sofa nearby. Her tone was polite, non-committal, the practiced neutrality of a seasoned executive. But beneath the surface, a flicker of curiosity ignited. Indeed, Alan Drake, the CFO, replied, his eyes darting between Camille and the board. He had always been a keen observer, attuned to the subtle shifts in power dynamics that often played out within the company's hierarchical structure. This game, he sensed, was more than a mere pastime. The game progressed. Each move Camille made, while seemingly unassuming, carried a quiet strength, a subtle undercurrent of strategy that Gregory, blinded by his own arrogance, failed to grasp. With each passing turn, the veneer of casual amusement began to chip away, replaced by a palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. The other executives, initially engaged in their own conversations, gradually fell silent, their attention drawn to the unfolding drama on the chessboard. "So, Camille," Gregory began, his voice dripping with condescension, attempting to break her concentration. "Do you enjoy working here?" Camille's fingers paused over a pawn. Her eyes lifted, meeting his with a gaze that was both direct and unreadable. "It's work," she replied, her voice soft yet firm. "Like any other." Gregory chuckled, mistaking her simple answer for naivete. "But surely you aspire to something more?" "Everyone aspires," Camille said, her gaze returning to the board, moving the pawn forward one space. The move was small, almost insignificant, yet it carried a weight that Gregory couldn't quite comprehend. "But sometimes circumstances dictate our path." He scoffed. "Circumstances? Don't tell me you're one of those who blames their lack of ambition on external factors." "My mother fell ill," Camille stated, her voice devoid of self-pity, yet tinged with a sadness that resonated deeper than any dramatic outburst could have. "I left school to care for her." She captured one of Gregory's rooks. A gasp rippled through the room. The casual air was completely gone. Gregory stared at the board, disbelief clouding his features. He hadn't even seen it coming. His carefully constructed strategy, his perceived dominance, had been subtly undermined piece by piece. "You left school?" he echoed, the question laced with an implicit judgment. "Yes," Camille confirmed, her eyes meeting his gaze with a quiet strength. "You don't have to do something forever for it to matter." A wave of discomfort washed over Gregory. He'd built his empire on the relentless pursuit of more, on the insatiable hunger for achievement. The notion that something as seemingly insignificant as caring for a sick parent could hold value, could even overshadow professional ambition, was alien to him. He felt exposed, his carefully constructed facade of success beginning to crumble under the weight of her quiet dignity. The game reached its climax. Camille's pieces advanced with a precision that bordered on surgical. Gregory's defenses, once seemingly impenetrable, now lay in ruins. He struggled to find a viable move, his mind racing, his confidence shattered. He glanced around the room, seeking reassurance, but found only stunned silence. Even Janice, usually so adept at smoothing over awkward situations, remained speechless, her eyes fixed on the board. Camille moved her queen. "Check." The word hung in the air, sharp and decisive, a final blow to Gregory's already fractured ego. He stared at the board, a mixture of disbelief and humiliation churning within him. He had underestimated her, dismissed her, and now, in front of his entire executive team, he was being utterly dismantled. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath, the words laced with a bitterness that surprised even himself. He searched frantically for a way out, a way to salvage the situation, but there was none. His king was trapped, surrounded, defeated. Camille met his gaze, her expression calm, almost serene. "Checkmate." The lingering scent of expensive scotch hung in the air, a testament to the evening's earlier forced camaraderie. Crystal glasses, half empty, scattered across the low tables like fallen stars. Gregory Alton, his tie loosened, his face a carefully constructed mask of nonchalance, swirled the ice in his drink, the clinking a brittle counterpoint to the silence. He hadn't expected this. Not from the quiet Maid, certainly. Not from Camille. The chessboard, a battlefield of polished mahogany and ivory, still sat between them, a stark reminder of his unexpected defeat. Just a game, he told himself, the words hollow even to his own ears. A silly game. Doesn't mean anything. He forced a laugh, the sound strained. "Well, that was unexpected." Camille Bennett, her hands folded neatly in her lap, met his gaze. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky just before dawn, held a depth that unnerved him. They seemed to see right through his carefully constructed facade, stripping away the layers of wealth and privilege to expose the raw insecurity beneath. Inwardly, she considered his attempt at dismissal. Unexpected, she thought, a flicker of amusement touching her lips. Or simply unforeseen. He hadn't anticipated her skill, hadn't even considered the possibility that she could be a worthy opponent. He'd seen her as a pawn, another piece of the scenery in his meticulously curated world. Now, she had disrupted the order, shifted the balance, and he was scrambling to regain control. "Beginner's luck, I suppose," he added, attempting a casual shrug that felt stiff and unnatural. He took a large gulp of his drink, the burn of the alcohol a welcome distraction. Janice Harper, the VP of Marketing, watched the exchange with a growing fascination. She'd initially dismissed the chess match as a harmless diversion, a way for Gregory to amuse himself. But Camille's quiet confidence, the subtle shift in the room's dynamic, had piqued her interest. He's underestimated her, she realized, a flicker of admiration igniting within her. Badly. Alan Drake, the CFO, leaned forward, a knowing glint in his eyes. Beginner's luck rarely results in a checkmate, Gregory. His voice was smooth, laced with a hint of amusement. He'd witnessed Gregory's casual cruelty before, the way he wielded his power like a weapon. This, however, felt different. This felt like a crack in the foundation, a tremor that could potentially shake the entire structure. Gregory's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of the other executives on him, their amusement palpable. He'd meant to humiliate the maid, to reaffirm his position at the top of the food chain. Instead, he'd made a fool of himself. Only people losing say that, he retorted, the words sharper than he intended. Camille's expression remained unchanged, her composure a stark contrast to his growing agitation. Losing isn't the issue, Mr. Alton, she said, her voice soft but firm. It's how you lose. You didn't respect the board. She paused, her gaze meeting his. And you didn't respect me. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken tension. The clinking of ice in Gregory's glass seemed deafening. He stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and anger swirling within him. How dare this maid lecture him? How dare she challenge his authority, his dominance? His internal monologue raged. She's just a maid. I pay her wages. I own this place. Yet, beneath the anger, a prickle of unease began to spread. He had underestimated her. He'd seen her as an object, not a person. A servant, not an equal. The other executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The air crackled with the sudden shift in power dynamics. The realization that their leader, the man they followed and obeyed, had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by Maid, was unsettling. They had witnessed not just a chess match, but a dismantling of their carefully constructed hierarchy. Janice Harper took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes fixed on Camille. Respect, she thought, the word echoing in her mind. Something Gregory clearly doesn't understand. She had always admired Camille's quiet efficiency, her unwavering professionalism. Now, she saw a strength, a resilience that she hadn't recognized before. Alan Drake, his gaze moving between Gregory and Camille, felt a sense of almost grim satisfaction. He had long been aware of the undercurrents of resentment simmering beneath the surface of their corporate culture. Gregory's arrogance, his blatant disregard for those he deemed beneath him, had created a toxic environment. Perhaps, he thought, this incident would be the catalyst for change. Gregory, struggling to regain his composure, cleared his throat. I merely meant it as a friendly game, he stammered, the words sounding hollow even to him. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, the carefully constructed world he inhabited beginning to tremble. Camille's quiet response hung in the air, a subtle indictment of his behavior. A friendly game requires respect, Mr. Alton. For the game, for the opponent. She rose gracefully, her movements fluid and controlled. I believe my shift is over. With a slight nod, she turned and walked away, leaving Gregory sitting in stunned silence, the remnants of his arrogance shattered like broken glass. The chessboard, still bearing the silent testament to his defeat, seemed to mock him. He reached for his drink, his hand trembling slightly. The scotch, once a symbol of his power and control, now tasted like ash in his mouth. The low hum of the industrial refrigerator was the kitchen's constant, almost comforting drone. Camille moved with practiced ease, her hands swift and silent as she loaded the dishwasher. The scent of lemon verbena cleaning solution mingled with the lingering ghost of last night's extravagant dinner truffle oil, seared scallops, something expensive and faintly metallic. The remnants of the party, both literal and metaphorical, hung heavy in the air. She could still feel the weight of Gregory Alton's gaze, a palpable presence even in his absence. The memory of the chess game, the slow unraveling of his arrogance with each precise move she made, sent a shiver down her spine. It hadn't been a game, not really. It had been a dissection, a quiet, bloodless dismantling of everything he thought he represented. The rhythmic clatter of approaching heels broke the silence. Camille turned, her hands still slightly damp, to find Janice Harper, VP of Marketing, standing in the doorway. The woman's usual polished composure seemed slightly frayed, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. Camille braced herself, her heart tapping a steady rhythm against her ribs. She knew this conversation was coming. "Good morning, Camille," Janice began, her voice softer than Camille had ever heard it. The forced cheer that usually laced her interactions with the staff was absent. "Good morning, Miss Harper," Camille replied, her voice even, betraying none of the nervous flutter in her stomach. Janice hesitated, her gaze drifting to the chessboard still set up on a small table in the corner. "That was impressive," she finally said, the words seeming to catch at her throat. Camille simply nodded, a faint flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Impressive. The word echoed in her mind, hollow and insufficient. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about reclaiming something intangible that had been chipped away over years of silent subservience. Janice stepped closer, her designer heels clicking against the polished tile floor. "You have a real talent, Camille. A gift." The words were genuine, laced with a newfound respect. Camille felt a strange tightness in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and weariness. A gift, another label, another box to be placed in. She didn't want gifts or labels. She wanted the freedom to choose her own path, to define her own worth. "I've always enjoyed chess," Camille replied, keeping her voice neutral. The less she revealed, the more power she retained. Silence was a shield, a weapon even. Janice studied her for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Alan mentioned your situation," she began carefully, her tone laced with a gentle probing. "He said you had to put your education on hold." Camille's grip tightened on the dishcloth, her knuckles whitening. Alan. He had betrayed her confidence, however well-intentioned he might have been. A wave of resentment washed over her, quickly followed by a chilling realization. This conversation was not about her skill at chess. It was about her vulnerability. "I had circumstances," Camille said, her voice barely a whisper. The words felt heavy, laden with the unspoken weight of her past. "Camille," Janice said, her voice softening further. "You don't need to play for applause. You already earned something more valuable." Camille looked up, her eyes meeting Janice's. There was a flicker of understanding in those blue depths, a recognition that went beyond the surface. It was a look that acknowledged not just her skill of the game, but the quiet strength it took to play it under such loaded circumstances. Later that day, a crisp white envelope was slipped discreetly into Camille's hand. It contained a check, the amount large enough to make her head spin. Attached was a short, handwritten note from Gregory Alton. "My apologies for my misjudgment. Consider this a contribution to your future endeavors." The words were stiff, formal, almost devoid of emotion. Yet, beneath the carefully crafted facade, Camille sensed a hint of genuine remorse, a grudging acknowledgement of his own folly. She folded the check and tucked it away, her heart strangely unmoved by the sudden windfall. It wasn't about the money. It was about the silent shift in power, the subtle realignment of respect. The game had changed more than just the pieces on the board. It had changed the way she was seen, the way she saw herself. The quiet maid, the invisible presence, had finally made herself heard. The silence, once a prison, had become her strength. She had played her game, and she had won. Not just the chess match, but something far more significant. The game of survival. The game of self-respect. The game of life. The Flagstaff morning sun, sharp and clear, sliced through the glass wall of Gregory Alton's office, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A silent ballet he'd never noticed before. He sat behind his expansive mahogany desk, the polished surface reflecting his own image back at him, a man etched with the fatigue of a sleepless night and the unsettling weight of revelation. The weekend retreat, intended as a casual display of corporate bonhomie, had instead become a stark mirror, reflecting not the polished image he projected, but the raw, flawed man beneath. He picked up the exquisitely carved knight from his chest set, its smooth, cool surface a stark contrast to the turbulent thoughts churning within him. He could still feel the phantom pressure of Camille Bennett's gaze, steady and unervingly perceptive, as she systematically dismantled his strategy, piece by piece, just as she had dismantled his carefully constructed facade. The memory of her quiet triumph, her subtle smile, the ripple of surprise, and then something akin to respect that had crossed the faces of his colleagues, sent a wave of discomfort through him. It wasn't the loss itself that stung, but the realization of what it revealed. He had sought to humiliate her, to assert his dominance in the most petty of ways, and in doing so, he'd only succeeded in exposing his own shallowness. The weekend replayed in his mind, not as a curated highlight reel of corporate success, but as a series of uncomfortable truths. He saw his own condescension in the way he'd addressed Camille, his dismissive tone, the smug certainty of his own superiority. He saw the subtle flinch in Janice Harper's eyes when he made a particularly cutting remark, the way Alan Drake's usual jovial demeanor had tightened into something more guarded. He'd been so focused on projecting an image of power, he hadn't seen the subtle shifts in the room, the silent judgments, the growing discomfort of those around him. He set the knight down, the click echoing in the pre-dawn stillness of the office. He thought of Camille's face, framed by the dark fall of her hair, a quiet strength radiating from her that he'd completely missed in his initial assessment. He'd seen her as a function, a cog in the well-oiled machine of his retreat, not as a person. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. How many others had he dismissed, overlooked, their potential unseen because he'd been too blinded by his own self-importance? He reached for the intercom, his hand hovering for a moment before he pressed the button. "Janice, Alan, could you both come to my office, please? And would you also ask Camille Bennett to join us?" He released the button, a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation settling in his chest. He had a lot to say, and even more to learn. When they arrived, the silence in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Janice held herself with a new reserve, her usual bright smile replaced with a thoughtful frown. Alan's gaze was sharp, assessing, no longer tinged with the easy camaraderie Gregory was used to. In Camille, she stood quietly by the door, her expression unreadable, a quiet dignity radiating from her that made him acutely aware of his own failings. He cleared his throat, the sound loud in the stillness. "I asked you here this morning because I owe you an apology," he began, the words tasting strange on his tongue. He directed his gaze to Camille, meeting her steady gaze with an effort. "I behaved unacceptably this weekend. My behavior towards you, Camille, was disrespectful and frankly, beneath me. I am sincerely sorry." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, Camille spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't respect the board, Anne. You didn't respect me. You saw a role, not a person. And that applies to more than just me, doesn't it, Mr. Alton?" Her words hit their mark with the precision of surgeon's scalpel. Gregory looked at Janice, at Alan, and saw the unspoken agreement in their eyes. He had built his empire on efficiency, on metrics, on seeing people as instruments to achieve his goals. He hadn't realized how much that had cost him, how much he'd blinded himself to. "You're right," he admitted, his voice low. I've been operating under a flawed premise. Seeing people clearly starts with looking without judgment." He took a deep breath, the air feeling strangely lighter in his lungs. "I want to change that, starting now." He outlined a series of initiatives, a company-wide review of employee satisfaction, a mentorship program, and, most importantly, a comprehensive professional development program for support staff, including full tuition reimbursement. He saw the flicker of surprise in Camille's eyes, the subtle nod of approval from Alton, the thoughtful expression on Janice's face. "This isn't just about making amends," he continued, his gaze sweeping over their faces. "It's about building a better company, a more human company. And that starts with recognizing the value of every single person who contributes to it." As the meeting concluded, a new kind of silence settled in the room, no longer heavy with tension, but filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Gregory walked Camille to the door, a strange sense of humility washing over him. "Thank you," he said, the words simple but sincere. For everything." She met his gaze, a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher in her eyes. "You have a long way to go, Mr. Alton," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But it's a good start." She turned and walked away, leaving Gregory standing in the doorway of his office, the morning sun warm on his face. The dust motes still danced in the air, but now he saw them not as insignificant particles, but as tiny, intricate pieces of a larger, more complex whole. He had a long way to go, yes, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope, a glimmer of something genuine and true emerging from the ashes of his carefully constructed facade. The clatter of chess pieces being swept into their velvet-lined box echoed in the sudden, stunned silence. Gregory Alton stared at the board, the stark reality of checkmate, a physical blow. His fingers, usually so assured and commanding, twitched. He had expected amusement, a light-hearted display of dominance over a member of the staff. Instead, he'd been dismantled piece by calculated piece. Camille Bennett, the quiet maid he'd so casually dismissed, had not only beaten him, but she'd done so with an almost unsettling calm. Her eyes, which he'd barely registered before, now held a quiet depth that seemed to see straight through him. He felt a prickle of unease, a sensation so unfamiliar it bordered on panic. He could feel the weight of the room's attention, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, and the growing crack in his carefully constructed facade. Camille met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Inside, a storm raged. The satisfaction of victory warred with the ingrained instinct to remain invisible. She hadn't sought this confrontation, this exposure. But sometimes, silence was a form of complicity, and the casual cruelty in Gregory's eyes had ignited something within her. The game had become a battlefield, not of pawns and bishops, but of respect and dignity. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. She fought to maintain the serene mask, to not betray the tremor in her hands as she began to gather the chess pieces. Janice Harper, the VP of Marketing, who had initially observed the game with detached politeness, now watched Camille with a newfound curiosity. Her carefully cultivated professional smile faltered, replaced by a thoughtful frown. The casual dismissal she had felt towards the help now seemed inappropriate. There was a quiet power in Camille's demeanor, a resilience that resonated deeper than any boardroom presentation. The faint scent of lilies, Camille's subtle perfume, seemed to linger in the air, a delicate counterpoint to the stale cigar smoke that usually permeated these executive gatherings. Janice's internal monologue shifted. This wasn't just a game. It was a statement. Alan Drake, the CFO, who had a knack for reading the currents of power, saw the tectonic shift in the room. He had initially felt a pang of sympathy for Camille, a small rebellion against the ingrained hierarchy of their corporate world. Now, a different emotion stirred within him: respect. He had seen Gregory's ruthless ambition firsthand, his calculated climb to the top. But he had also witnessed his increasing detachment, his blindness to those he considered beneath him. This chess match, this quiet rebellion, was a much-needed disruption. "Quite a game, Camille," he said, his voice carrying just enough weight to break the suffocating silence. "Your strategy was impressive." A ripple went through the room. Heads that had been averted now turned towards Camille. Whispers, hushed and speculative, replaced the earlier laughter. The air crackled with a new, uncertain energy. Gregory, still reeling from his defeat, managed a tight smile. "Yes, quite unexpected," he said, his voice strained. He wanted to dismiss it, to regain control of the narrative, but the words felt hollow even to him. The following days were a montage of subtle shifts and unspoken acknowledgments. Camille continued her work, her movements as quiet and efficient as before. But the way people looked at her had changed. There was a newfound respect, a hesitant acknowledgement of her presence. The casual dismissiveness was replaced by a cautious politeness. Small gestures, a nod in the hallway, a held door, a shared smile spoke volumes. In the executive meetings, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual banter felt forced, the easy camaraderie strained. The chess game had become a silent elephant in the room, a constant reminder of the assumptions they had all made. Janice found herself paying more attention to the quiet staff members, noticing the small details of their work, the subtle cues of their emotions. Alton, emboldened by Camille's quiet defiance, started questioning some of Gregory's more autocratic decisions, pushing back against the culture of unquestioning obedience that had taken root. One evening, weeks after the chess match, Janice and Alton found themselves discussing the incident over drinks. The opulent bar, usually a scene of boisterous celebration, felt subdued. It wasn't just about the game, was it? Janice murmured, swirling the ice in her glass. It was about something more. Alton nodded, his gaze thoughtful. It's about how you move with discipline, with grace, with integrity, he said, his voice low. Janice paused, the words resonating with a truth she hadn't fully grasped before. How do you move when no one's watching? She whispered, more to herself than to Alton. The question hung in the air, unanswered, a silent challenge to the carefully constructed world they inhabited. Gregory, sitting alone in his penthouse office, overlooking the glittering city, found himself haunted by the same question. The reflection in the glass wall seemed to mock him, revealing a hollowness he had tried so hard to ignore. The chessboard, still set up on a side table, became a symbol of his own blindness, his inability to see the quiet strength that resided in the most unexpected places. He had sought to humiliate, to dominate, but in the end, it was he who had been exposed. The silence of his vast apartment felt heavy, oppressive. He reached out, his fingers tracing the smooth contours of the queen, the most powerful piece on the board. But the power felt different now, not of dominance, but of responsibility. The game, he realized, was far from over. It had just begun.